And welcome to One Hero a Day, where everyday courage lives on. Like and subscribe to hear a new story each night. There is something in the way dusk settles over a river village in southern Bangladesh. It doesn't fall so much as it folds, folding over homes made of corrugated tin and faded blue tarp, over banana trees and idle cows, over narrow paths where children's sandals lie forgotten. In the village of Char Hazari, the sun had just dipped below the mangrove fringe, leaving a pink wash behind. Not the soft pink of a postcard, but the deep kind that clings to the water like skin. It was the kind of evening that usually passed without remark. But this one had weight in the air. 16-year-old Rafiq felt it before most. He stood alone at the edge of his family's rice field, where the muddy land met the river's edge. His feet were wet, soaked not just from the day's work, but from something deeper. The earth beneath him was softer than it should be. The smell in the air had changed. It wasn't just wet, it was heavy, metallic, like rust stirred with smoke. For years, he'd lived by that river. He'd fetched water from it, bathed in it, even feared it once as a child when the current snatched his wooden toy and didn't give it back. But the river had always been a part of life, predictable in its unpredictability. It would rise and it would fall. The elders said so. The earth knew how to take care of itself. Still, Rafiq's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, where clouds sat darker than usual. A low ceiling smudged thick with something unsettled. Behind him, the village was moving slowly into the evening. Cooking fires bloomed in doorways. Radios buzzed with old songs and local gossip. Women patted dough into chapatis, and small boys wrestled in the dirt. From one bamboo house, someone was playing a flute, off-key but earnest. From the porch of his own modest home, his mother called softly, "Rafiq, tanda lagbe. Come wash up before the Maghrib prayer." He turned, but only half-heartedly. He lingered a moment longer, his breath sinking with the breeze. He didn't know what he was waiting for. Maybe a sound, maybe a sign. He was the kind of boy who noticed small things. The way the goats bleated differently when the weather changed. The way the frogs had fallen quiet too early this year. His school teacher once called him old in the eyes, though he rarely spoke in class unless spoken to. His friends teased him for always helping the older folks, carrying water, fixing broken steps, listening patiently to long stories told in trembling voices. But Rafiq didn't mind. In a village like Char Hazari, kindness wasn't an obligation. It was simply part of the rhythm. You helped those who needed it, because someday, someone would help you. That was the way of things. That evening, after rinsing his hands and sitting down for a dinner of lentils and mashed pumpkin, he asked quietly, "Amma, did you see the river today?" His mother, wiping her brow with the edge of her sari, didn't look up. "It's Monsoon, beta. It always swells this time." "But it's early," he murmured. "And stronger." She didn't reply. Not because she didn't care, but because caring too deeply about what the river might do was like worrying about the sky falling. What good would it change? Later that night, after prayer and chores, he lay awake on the woven mat beside his little sister, Lila, who was curled up with a ragged doll. The roof creaked gently under the wind, and from the open window, he could hear the frogs starting again. But faintly, not as they should be. Not loud, not confident, just cautious croaks in the dark. That was what finally stirred something in him. He rose quietly, stepping past his mother's resting form, and padded outside into the night. The rain had started, but not heavily. A fine mist more than anything else. But he walked to the river again. Always the river. He stood still, barefoot in the damp earth, and watched it. It was darker than usual, not just because of the hour, but because it seemed to move differently. It shimmered oddly in the moonlight, curling up along the banks with a kind of hunger. And then, very faintly, he heard it. A sound like a groan. Not human, not animal, the kind of sound only land can make, when something underneath begins to shift. He turned to go home, but not out of fear, out of purpose. Something had set inside him like a stone. By morning, the water would rise. Of that he was sure, and though he didn't yet know how or why, he knew the village wouldn't be ready. Not the elderly widow who lived alone in the low house with the cracked door. Not the couple with walking sticks who still refused to move in with their daughter. Not the old man who watched the river every day from his cane chair and said it was tamer than in '84. They would stay. Because staying was easier than believing the worst. Rafiq laid back down beside his sister and closed his eyes. But the sound of the river followed him into sleep. And beneath that sleep, the seed of a choice had been planted. The morning began not with alarm, but with absence. There were no birds. Rafiq noticed it even before opening his eyes. He was used to the rhythmic chatter of mynahs and drongos, the soft coo of doves nesting in the neighbor's mango tree. But this morning, there was only the thin hiss of rain on thatched roofs, a steady whisper that seemed to have swallowed everything else. His little sister Lila stirred beside him, pulling the threadbare sheet higher over her head. His mother was already gone, probably preparing tea over the clay stove behind the house. He sat up slowly, muscles stiff, not from labor but from some tension he didn't yet understand. The rain was no longer misting. It came down straight now, not with violence, but with intention. From the doorway, he saw puddles that hadn't been there yesterday. The ditch that ran beside their home had disappeared beneath a sheet of brown water. Chickens clucked uneasily from the porch rafters. Rafiq moved outside barefoot, blinking into the gray light. He passed by their bamboo fence and crossed to the communal pump, but it was already surrounded by muddy overflow. A boy about his age was standing there, sandals in hand, frowning at the mess. They nodded to each other without speaking. No one liked to say it aloud. It made it too real. By mid-morning, Rafiq helped his mother pile firewood onto the porch. The fields were too soaked to work in, and school had already been canceled after last week's warning from the district office. Until further notice, they said, which could mean a week or all season. Still, the grown-ups spoke with half-smiles. They compared rainfall to past years, listed stories of tougher floods, the one in 2004, or the one when the boats floated into the market like ghosts. There was pride in survival, resilience stitched into memory, but not everyone spoke with ease. Rafiq caught sight of Amma Zora around noon, struggling to close her shutters in the rising wind. The widow lived alone in a leaning house not far from the edge of the village. Her children had died in the pandemic years ago, and though many offered to help, she remained stubbornly independent. He jogged over to her, heart lightening for the first time that day. "Amma, let me do that," he said gently. She squinted up at him with watery eyes. "You always appear when I need you, Rafiq." The shutters creaked into place, and he helped wedge them shut with bamboo rods. Inside, her room smelled of dried fish and sandalwood, and something older, like memories. She offered him tea, but he declined. He still had to check on others. "Come by tomorrow, Amma," he said. "If the rain keeps falling, you should stay with us." She only smiled, her face wrinkling like silk. "I've lived through worse, child. The river rises, but it knows me." He wanted to argue, to tell her the river didn't know anyone. Not really. But he didn't. He just nodded and left. That afternoon, the village gathered near the community radio, where crackled voices read weather bulletins in urgent tones. Padma River levels rising rapidly, upstream dam showing signs of instability, evacuate low-lying areas, local authorities monitoring. But there was no plan. There was never a plan. There were just people, their homes, and the water pressing closer. Rafiq returned home to find his mother folding clothes into a plastic bag, not with panic, but with preparation. She looked at him and said, "We may go to the schoolhouse tonight. It's built higher." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the water creeping into the footpath beyond their porch. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't crashing in like a movie flood. It was creeping, inch by inch, like something patient. "Ma," he said slowly, "if it gets worse, we should help Amazora first." His mother's eyes softened, but her lips pressed into a line. "Yes, we will, and the others too if they need. But we must move early." That night, he sat on the porch with his sister curled beside him, watching as lightning lit the clouds in the distance. The rain came harder now. The river had vanished in the dark, not gone, just swallowed into the blackness beyond the trees. Somewhere down the road, a cow bellowed. Farther still, a dog barked into the rain, but mostly it was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before a change. Not a pause, but a breath held long enough to hurt. Rafiq closed his eyes, leaning his head against the bamboo post. He didn't know exactly what would come, but he felt it. Something was on its way, and he somehow would have to meet it. By morning, the rain no longer whispered. It hammered, not in wild fits, but steady and hard, as though the sky had opened 1,000 faucets and forgotten to turn them off. The sound was no longer background. It filled every space, between footsteps, in conversation, even in dreams. Rafiq awoke to the sound of water lapping against wood, not nearby, beneath. He swung his legs off the woven mat, and his feet splashed into shallow water pooling across the floor. Not deep, not dangerous, not yet. But it was inside. That was enough to change everything. "Amma," he called. His mother was already awake, pressing clothes into a tarp-lined sack. Her face, though tired, was composed. "It came through the back," she said quietly. "We leave in an hour." Rafiq stepped out into the yard. The world had changed overnight. The narrow dirt lane between houses had become a river. It wasn't imagination, it was literal. Murky water moved in sluggish curls past chicken coops, past sandals and buckets and drifted rice straw. The rice paddies beyond the village had disappeared under brown waves, and the river, the Padma, had claimed the land like a slow, stubborn thief. Villagers moved like ghosts through the shallows, clutching bundles above their heads, goats tied with rope around their waists. Children cried as their feet slipped in the muck. A man shouted for his cow. A girl clung to a tin basin like a lifeboat. The emergency siren from the district center crackled faintly in the distance, barely audible beneath the roar of the downpour. The elevated schoolhouse had been designated a shelter. Rafiq's mother motioned for him to gather Lila and come. She carried their only cooking pot wrapped in cloth, like it was gold. But Rafiq paused. Something pulled at him. A name, a face. He looked across the flooded lane toward Amazora's house, and then another. Old Rahman, who needed a walking stick just to reach the mosque, and Banu Appa and her husband, both in their 70s, who hadn't left their home since his stroke last year. "Ma," he said, "I'll come after. Let me check them first." She froze. "Number Rafiq?" "I won't be long. Please." His mother looked at the rising water, then at her son. His shirt clung to his chest. His eyes were calm, not reckless. Finally, she nodded. "Come quickly. We'll wait an hour at the schoolhouse." No more. Rafiq didn't wait for more. He rolled his pants to his knees and waded into the flood, arms outstretched for balance. The water was cold, filled with silt and bits of straw. It hid the ground beneath, every step uncertain. But he moved fast, cutting through water that reached his shins, then thighs. He passed homes half submerged, saw a bicycle caught in a tree, heard the cry of a goat stranded on a roof. When he reached Amazora's home, the door was ajar, just enough to show the water had gotten in. He knocked loudly. "Amma, it's Rafiq!" No answer. He stepped inside. Water was ankle-high in the front room. The woven mat floated like a raft. Pots bobbed gently in corners. And then, a cough. He found her in the back room, sitting on a stool, sari-soaked, trying to reach for something on a shelf. "Rafiq," she said, voice rough. "I slipped. I couldn't." He stepped through the water, heart pounding. "It's okay. Let's go. Now." She reached for him, but her legs wobbled beneath her. He steadied her, wrapped his arm around her thin shoulders and helped her to the door. "I have to get my photos," she murmured. "No time. But we'll come back. I promise." She said nothing more, only leaned on him as he guided her into the flood. Outside, the current was stronger. Debris brushed past. A floating sack of rice, someone's shirt, a child's toy boat. He helped her step carefully, foot by foot. Each time she stumbled, he steadied her. They moved slowly, too slowly. When they reached the schoolhouse steps, Rafiq's arms trembled from the effort. His mother was there, waiting, drenched and anxious. She helped lift Amazora inside, wrapping her in a towel. But Rafiq didn't follow them up. He turned. "Where are you going?" his mother cried. "Old Rahman," he shouted. "And Banu Appa." She stepped toward him. "You're not a rescue worker, Rafiq." "I know, but no one else is coming." Before she could answer, he was gone, swallowed again by water and rain. The wind picked up as Rafiq moved deeper into the village. It came in long, low breaths, not gusts, but sighs from something vast. Trees no longer stood still. Their branches bowed like worshippers. Tin roofs rattled in chorus. The rain had turned to needles slanting sideways, sharp against his skin. But Rafiq didn't stop. He thought of old Rahman, whose house sat near the old banyan tree, where the ground dipped slightly. The same ground now likely under 2 feet of water. The old man had once been a school teacher, known for storytelling and sweet tea. He had no children left nearby, only an old walking stick and his memories. When Rafiq reached his door, he saw the water was up to the windows. He banged on the wood. "Rahman Chacha, are you there?" A faint voice answered, hoarse and confused. "Who's calling?" "The roof is leaking." Rafiq pushed open the door and stepped inside. The scene was worse than he'd imagined. The furniture floated, not gently, but drunkenly, knocking into walls. Books, soaked and ruined, littered the floor like wreckage. Rahman sat on his bed, which had been pushed against the wall by the current. He looked smaller, curled into himself, eyes wide with fear and fever. "Rafiq? That you, lad?" "I'm here, Chacha. We're going to the schoolhouse." "The school? My legs won't. I haven't walked far in years." Rafiq glanced around. The water was nearly at the bed now. There was no time. He pulled a broken chair from under the floating table, flipped it upside down, and tied the old man's legs together with his belt. "I'll carry you," he said, almost to himself. He crouched down, lifted Rahman onto his back, and tied the arms loosely around his neck. It was awkward, heavy, and unbalanced, but possible. The old man muttered something between apology and disbelief. Rafiq didn't answer. He needed every breath for movement. Outside, the water had risen again. The sky was nearly black, even though it was midday. With each step, he leaned forward, muscles straining. The current tugged at his legs. His foot hit something. A submerged step? A branch? He didn't know. He stumbled but did not fall. Villagers watched from rooftops, their eyes wide, silent. Some waved. One boy shouted something about a raft. But Rafiq kept going. Every 20 feet, he had to pause. Not to rest, but to recenter, to keep from tipping. Finally, the schoolhouse came into view again. A beacon in the flood. Someone ran down to help. Together, they lifted Rahman onto the porch. He groaned, but his hand found Rafiq's and squeezed it. Then Rafiq sat, shaking, drenched, and breathless. He didn't speak, just nodded once. He wanted to rest, but he couldn't. His eyes turned toward the far end of the village, where Banu Appa and her husband lived. A place deeper in the flood zone. A house already on the edge of the embankment, even in dry seasons. He stood again. "Wait," someone called. "You've done enough." But he was already gone. It took twice as long to reach them. The current had grown faster here. Water reached his chest in places. Once, he lost footing and had to grab hold of a fence post. By the time he reached the house, it looked like it was sinking. Not fast, but slow, like a ship at sea. One corner had collapsed. The bamboo walls were buckling under the weight of water. "Banu Appa!" he shouted. "Are you here?" There was a banging from inside, then a voice, low and frantic. "We're trapped! The door!" He waded around the side and found the window half submerged. With a stone from the path, he shattered the bamboo lattice. Inside, Banu Appa's husband was sitting in a wooden chair, one side of his body slack. She stood behind him, holding his shoulders, soaked and shaking. "I can't move him alone," she whispered. Rafiq didn't hesitate. He climbed through the broken frame. Together they wrapped the old man in a wet bedsheet, knotting the ends like a sling. The roof creaked overhead. "Hurry," Banu Appa said, voice cracking. "It's not stable." They moved with quiet desperation, no time for panic. Each second was breath and motion. Outside, they floated the old man on an overturned door, guiding it slowly down the current. Rafiq held one side, Banu the other. Once the raft tilted dangerously. Another time it snagged on a fence. But they made it. When the schoolhouse came into sight again, cheers broke out. People rushed into the water to help them. Rafiq collapsed on the porch beside the old man's makeshift raft, lungs burning. And then he saw his mother, kneeling beside Lila. She didn't scold him, didn't even speak. She only placed a hand on his head, soaked and trembling, and left it there. By afternoon, the flood no longer felt like a disaster. It felt like a world with its own rules. Time moved differently. There were no clocks, no schedules. Only water, only movement, or stillness. The schoolhouse, though crowded and damp, had become a kind of ark. Over 70 people now filled its 2 stories, children sleeping on mats, women boiling tea over small stoves, men scanning the horizon for signs of help. Through broken windows and gaps in the tin roof, the flood could be seen in every direction, brown and endless. Rafiq sat near a window, legs folded, his soaked shirt stuck to his back. Lila leaned against him, quiet. He hadn't said much since helping rescue Banu Appa and her husband. He wasn't tired in the way one usually feels tired. It was a quiet kind of depletion, the kind that leaves you wide-eyed, alert, but with a hollowness beneath the skin. And yet, even in that state, he was thinking of others. There were more houses at the far edge of the village. He knew them well, had helped bring bags of rice there, carried water jugs during dry season. A widow lived in one, a boy with a limp in another. As the sky darkened again and the wind rose, he looked across the schoolroom at his mother. She saw the question before he asked it. She walked over, sat beside him. "You've done so much," she whispered. "More than anyone." "I know," he said softly, "but some are still waiting." She didn't argue, just looked at the sky, then at her son. "If you go," she said, "take someone with you this time." He nodded. That evening, he set out again, this time with Hassan, an older boy known for building fishing rafts. They lashed together plastic drums and bamboo poles into a makeshift platform. The water had grown colder. They paddled through what had once been the village path, steering with broken oars. Dogs barked from rooftops. Chickens clucked from trees. The flood seemed to have frozen the village in a dream. Familiar shapes in the wrong places. They found the widow's house first. She was in the attic, holding a jug of water and a photo of her son. Next came the boy with the limp. He waved from a tree, soaked but smiling, as if expecting them. Each time they helped gently, no rushing, no shouting. Each time, Rafiq offered his hand with quiet certainty, and each time, someone took it like it was a bridge. By the time they returned to the schoolhouse, their raft sagged under the weight of 5 rescued souls. The entire shelter rose to meet them. No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of story. They simply made space, spread mats, poured warm tea, and in the quiet, someone said Rafiq's name aloud, like a blessing. That night, the wind howled. The rain came harder than before. But the schoolhouse held, and inside, people slept a little easier because they knew someone would come for them, even if the water rose again. The next morning arrived not with sunlight, but with a strange silence. The rain had stopped. For the first time in 3 days, the air held a tentative stillness, as if the storm had paused to catch its breath. The clouds still hung low, heavy like unwept sorrow, but the hammering sound had ceased. People emerged slowly from their corners in the schoolhouse, blinking like night animals seeing dawn. Children peered out through window slats. A woman stood quietly at the doorway, holding her baby to her chest. Rafiq sat beside the window, staring out. The water had not receded. If anything, it looked deeper, wider, stretching into the rice paddies, touching the treetops in the distance. But its movement was less violent, more like a lake now than a river. The calm was deceptive. Everyone knew it. The embankment to the east, the only thing protecting the higher ground beyond, had been strained to the brink. Word came from a man who had ventured up to the mosque rooftop with a pair of binoculars. "The embankment is cracked," he announced. "If it goes, it'll flood the fields toward the highway." Murmurs spread quickly. Some feared the schoolhouse would be next. Others whispered about food running out. Rafiq's mother pulled him aside. "People are growing restless," she said. "Some want to leave and try to reach town." He nodded. "It's risky. The roads are underwater, and if the embankment breaks..." "They won't wait long," she said. By mid-morning, a group of villagers began lashing together another raft. This one larger, meant to carry families toward higher land. Rafiq watched in silence. He respected their decision. But something else tugged at his focus. During his last trip through the flood, he had passed an old warehouse, once used for rice storage. It had been shuttered for months, but he remembered stories from his grandfather about how it had once been used during the '88 floods as a food shelter. What if, he thought. He found Hassan and told him. "A supply depot?" Hassan frowned. "It's risky, but worth checking." They gathered 3 more volunteers. Together they set off on the raft, paddling slowly toward the structure. The journey was harder this time. The current, though slower, had shifted direction. Twice they had to backtrack. When they reached the warehouse, the doors were barely above the waterline. Inside, it was dark and damp. But what they found changed everything. Stacked near the back wall were several bags of rice, water damaged at the bottom, but salvageable on top. Cans of lentils, jars of salt, even a box of chlorine tablets marked Emergency 2015. Their cheers were muffled, cautious. They loaded what they could onto the raft and returned to the schoolhouse like quiet messengers in a dream. When the villagers saw what they brought, something shifted. Not just relief, hope. People stopped arguing, they helped. They organized. Rafiq stood near the back as ration lines formed. He didn't say much, but when an old man approached him and pressed both palms together in silent gratitude, Rafiq returned the gesture, eyes lowered. That night, under a gray sky, they boiled the salvaged rice in 2 shared pots. Children ate first, and though they were still wet, still cold, still trapped, something warm passed between them. A feeling not of rescue, but of care. And for Rafiq, that was enough. That night, a candle flickered near the blackboard, casting long shadows across the floor. The schoolhouse had grown quieter, not from fear, but fatigue. A kind of stillness only found after days of surviving. People no longer asked when the water would go. They simply asked, "What now?" Rafiq couldn't sleep. He lay on a thin mat near the corner, Lila curled beside their mother. He listened to the sounds, someone coughing near the back, a baby fussing gently, the distant lap of water outside. His mind drifted, not to the dangers still ahead, but to the day before the rains. The streets had been dry then. He'd played with a ball made from old plastic bags, laughed with Hassan near the tea stall, smelled onions frying in someone's kitchen. It felt like a different country. He sat up, rubbed his eyes. His shirt was still damp. He rose quietly and stepped outside. The moon had pushed through the clouds, a pale, ghostly disk. The water gleamed silver, stretching in all directions. It no longer looked like danger. It looked like sorrow made visible. Then he heard a voice. Couldn't sleep? Hassan sat near the door, his feet dangling into the floodwater. He passed Rafiq a cup of lukewarm tea. They sat in silence for a while. Then Hassan spoke again. "I used to think heroism was loud," he said, "like in the movies." Rafiq said nothing, only looked at the moon. "But maybe it's just staying, showing up again the next morning, helping carry someone's weight when no one sees it." Rafiq nodded slowly. And maybe, Hassan added, it's not about being brave, just being needed. The water rippled as a fish broke the surface and disappeared. Rafiq took a sip of the tea. It was weak, but warm. He looked out at the rooftops in the distance. A dog barked somewhere, faint and lonesome. Hassan, he said, tomorrow we check the clinic. Hassan turned to him. You think there's still medicine left? I don't know, but we should try. And that was it. Not a grand plan, just a thread to follow. The next morning, the two boys prepared before sunrise. They brought rope, sacks, a flashlight with nearly dead batteries. The clinic lay beyond the flooded mango orchard, once a bright white building surrounded by marigolds. Now, it looked like an island with its walls partly submerged. The raft creaked beneath their weight as they crossed the murky water. The air smelled of mud and mildew. Inside the clinic, they moved slowly, careful not to disturb the weakened walls. The shelves had mostly collapsed, but in the back, beneath a cabinet, they found several sealed tins, antiseptic, cotton, iodine, and in a tin box wrapped in a damp cloth, blister packs of antibiotics. Rafiq's hands trembled as he held it. A victory, small, but life-saving. When they returned to the schoolhouse, a woman waiting in the corner came forward. Her daughter had a deep cut that had grown red and hot. Rafiq knelt down, cleaned the wound gently, and applied the salve. The child didn't cry, just stared at him. And in that moment, something shifted in Rafiq, not in his body, but his being. He had not just saved her. He had become someone people trusted, someone they looked to not for answers, but for presence. That night, he finally slept, not because the danger had passed, but because he had chosen, again, to stay. The next day broke with low thunder rumbling on the horizon. Not the sharp cracks of a fresh storm, but a deep, tired growl from skies that had wept too long. The villagers in the schoolhouse woke slowly. They moved with care, as if the water had drained not just the land, but something inside them. But even in that heaviness, small routines began to form. A man near the door set up a rotation for boiling water with the salvaged chlorine tablets. A few women prepared rice porridge with the last of the clean pots. And in the far corner, Rafiq sat with Hassan, folding strips of cloth into makeshift bandages. They were no longer reacting to the flood. They were adapting to it. It was Hassan who noticed the girl first. She stood near the entrance, barely 9 or 10 years old, holding a soaked bundle of cloth. Her eyes were wide, lips pressed tightly together. She had come alone. I came from the west, she whispered, from Kamarpara. That was the next village, 2 kilometers away. How? Rafiq asked gently. I walked along the embankment, she said. Most of it is gone, but I stayed near the trees. What's your name? Nusrat. She opened the cloth bundle. Inside was a note, written in shaky Bengali. Please help. We are trapped in the mosque rooftop. No boats, 2 elders unconscious, no food left. Imam M. Rahman. Rafiq's chest tightened. Nusrat had risked everything to deliver it. And now, another choice stood before him. He looked at Hassan. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. By midday, they had rebuilt the raft again, reinforced it with a few plastic drums someone had retrieved from a floating tea stall. This time, they added a second rope, meant to tow behind in case of emergency. Nusrat stayed behind, wrapped in a dry shawl someone gave her. Rafiq and Hassan moved quickly, carefully, guided by Nusrat's directions and memory. The route was treacherous. Fallen trees, hidden currents, Twice they had to push off submerged walls to avoid capsizing. As they neared Kamarpara, the smell of wet brick and sewage thickened. The mosque was just as described, its rooftop half collapsed, 4 figures huddled beneath the minaret. They waved as the raft approached. One man, the imam, helped the others down with trembling hands. An elderly woman needed to be lifted. The youngest, a boy no older than Rafiq, had a badly bruised leg. They made it back just before nightfall. At the schoolhouse, the silence that greeted them was different this time. It was reverent. A woman took the imam's hand and kissed it. Someone lit another candle. Children gave up their mats without being asked. Nusrat, seeing the imam safe, allowed herself to cry. And Rafiq, soaked to the bone, arms trembling, eyes burning, sat down at last. He didn't speak, didn't need to. In that moment, no one questioned who he was. He was no longer just a teenager. He was the one who showed up, again and again, and the village knew it. By now, word of the boy with the raft had begun to spread. Not through radios or phones, most of those had long died, but through whispered accounts, exchanged like offerings between survivors. "There's a boy," someone would say. "Not even 16, but he keeps coming back. He saved our imam. He brought medicine from the clinic. He finds the ones we thought we lost." Rafiq heard some of these words, not directly, but in the way people looked at him now, with soft gratitude and something like hope. He didn't let it go to his head. There was still so much to do. Each new day brought another quiet plea, a family trapped in a 2-story home, an old man seen drifting alone on a door, a mother searching for her missing child. Every story pulled at Rafiq like threads, and he couldn't ignore them. Hassan stayed by his side, tireless and steady. They had become a rhythm, one scanning the horizon, the other tightening rope or mending a broken oar. That morning, a new face entered the schoolhouse. She wore a soaked sari, her hands raw from rowing. She said she had come from the other side of the river bend, from Bagmara, a village deeper inland. "The school there is cut off," she said. "Many people, no supplies. The road's gone." Rafiq asked, "Is there a way through?" The woman hesitated. "There's a canal, narrow, overgrown. You'll need to duck under vines. But if you make it..." He nodded before she finished. By midday, they had prepared again. They took only essentials, rope, food, and a second pair of sandals tied to the raft's edge. The canal was as she described, narrow, winding, full of debris. Twice they had to use machetes to cut through thorny vines. The mosquitoes were thick, and the air smelled of rotting leaves and stagnant water. But after nearly an hour, they saw rooftops and people waving from a second-story window. A small girl threw her arms around Hassan the moment they stepped off the raft. They handed out lentils and iodine, told them to ration carefully. One elderly man, barely able to sit up, whispered, "We thought we were forgotten." Rafiq placed a hand on his shoulder. "No one's forgotten," he said quietly. On the way back, the canal was darker. Clouds had begun to gather again. Rafiq looked up. "Not another storm," he prayed. "Just wind. Just time." When they reached the schoolhouse, dusk had fallen. As they tied the raft, a boy from the school ran up. "A reporter came today," he said breathlessly. "From the district paper. They're looking for you." Rafiq blinked. "Why?" "They heard what you did." He stood there, unsure of what to say. But inside, his thoughts stayed with the man in Bagmara, too weak to stand, but not too far gone. "Tomorrow," Rafiq said quietly to Hassan, "we go back." with more. And that was it. Not for recognition, not for pride, but because someone still needed him, and that was reason enough. The air changed that night, not in temperature, but in texture. Heavier somehow, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. Rafiq couldn't sleep again. Not fully. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw faces, not of people he'd saved, but those he hadn't reached yet. And the water, it stayed, still and stubborn. The village was slowly becoming an island. The river, once a friend, had turned unfamiliar, a visitor who overstayed and refused to leave. The next morning, the reporter returned, a lean man with tired eyes and sandals still crusted with dried mud. He wasn't loud. He didn't carry a big camera, just a notepad, a pen, and a quiet curiosity. "I came to find the boy they're talking about," he said gently. "The one with the raft." Rafiq stood under the shade of a banyan tree, arms crossed, eyes squinting into the sun. "That's not why I do it," he said. "I know," the reporter replied, "but others need to know it's possible." The interview was brief. No dramatics, just questions about how, when, and why. What was left unsaid, the grief, the quiet fear, the exhaustion, lingered in the pauses. Before he left, the reporter handed Rafiq a wrapped package. "From a rescue team up north," he said. "I told them about you." Inside, new ropes, water purification tablets, a solar-powered flashlight, and a pair of rubber sandals that actually fit. Hassan laughed when he saw them. "Now you're official," he teased, but Rafiq just smiled softly and tucked them into his satchel. Later that day, they returned to Bagmara, this time with supplies, blankets, and notes from loved ones in neighboring villages. When they arrived, the small crowd cheered quietly. Not loudly, not like a celebration, but like a prayer being answered. They stayed longer this time, helped fix the collapsed awning, reinforced a rooftop with plastic sheets. One child, a boy with no shoes and a missing front tooth, clung to Rafiq's arm and asked, "Will you stay?" Rafiq knelt beside him. "I'll keep coming back," he said. "That's a promise." On the raft ride home, Hassan grew quiet. Rafiq noticed. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Hassan looked toward the water. "That I never thought I'd be doing this," he said. "And now I can't imagine not doing it." Rafiq nodded. It was strange. They were still boys. Their hands still bore calluses not from tools, but from rope and water. And yet, something inside had changed shape. They weren't waiting for grown-ups to fix things anymore. They were the ones showing up, again and again. As the raft neared home, a group of villagers waited at the edge, holding torches. The glow lit their faces in soft gold. A quiet welcome. Someone handed them a warm flatbread, fresh from a stove they'd managed to build over bricks. It was a feast, not for the food, but for the togetherness. And Rafiq, chewing slowly, finally felt something unfamiliar stir beneath the fatigue. Peace. For a moment. The water began to recede, but only slightly, inch by inch, like a curtain pulling back in slow motion. The flood wasn't finished, but it was tired, and so were the people. But in that soft retreat, hope took root. Not in grand gestures, but in the quiet things. Children sweeping the floor of the schoolhouse with broken palm fronds. An old man sharpening a knife to prepare vegetables. The clink of metal pots repurposed into lantern holders. Rafiq awoke before dawn, as usual. His sleep was still shallow, but he no longer dreaded waking. This morning, he didn't head toward the raft. Instead, he climbed to the roof of the schoolhouse. From there, he could see over what had once been streets, now flat silver plains. Birds had returned, small ones, hopping across the higher branches that jutted from the flood like survivors themselves. He took a breath and let it out slowly. The village would live. And then he noticed something. Far off, barely a speck, a small hand waving from the top of what looked like a metal structure. He narrowed his eyes. A water tower. He turned, already moving. By now, he didn't need to say much. One look at Hassan, and the boy grabbed their gear. This time, they moved faster, with purpose. The route wasn't marked, but Rafiq had memorized the landscape like the back of his hand. As they paddled closer, they saw her, a woman in a red shawl, clutching a child. She had tied herself to the top of the tower. A scarf was looped tightly around a railing, her arms gripping the child even in sleep. She didn't stir as they approached. Rafiq called gently. She awoke with a jolt, confusion giving way to relief in her eyes. "I didn't think you'd see us," she said hoarsely. "How long?" Hassan asked. 3 days, she whispered. "No food, just rainwater." The child stirred, feverish and weak. Rafiq passed over a bottle of boiled water and some rice porridge wrapped in a leaf. They cut the scarf carefully, helping her onto the raft. The return was slower. The child coughed. The woman wept quietly. At one point, Rafiq reached out, steadying her hand. "You're safe now," he said. That evening, back at the schoolhouse, a small circle formed around her. People listened, offered blankets. One woman sang a lullaby as the child finally slept. And Rafiq sat beside the water tower survivor, offering not advice, but presence. That had become his power, showing up not with answers, but with care. Later, as dusk settled in, someone brought him a hand-drawn map. Others saw smoke, they said, in the east. He looked at Hassan, then back at the map. The raft was still floating in the school courtyard, always ready, always waiting. The east had always been a mystery to Rafiq, a stretch of fields and tributaries too far from his side of the village to visit often. His grandfather once told him the eastern basin held the oldest banyan tree in the district. Now it likely stood half-drowned, holding on just as people were. The map he'd been given was crude, scrawled in pencil on the back of a school notebook. But it was enough. 2 X marks, a bend in the river, and the words, "Smoke seen here." By morning, Rafiq and Hassan were moving again. This time, a third came with them. Mina, a girl barely older than Rafiq, whose brother had gone missing during the first night of the monsoon. She had kept quiet for days, searching every face that entered the schoolhouse, until someone mentioned smoke in the east. "I think it might be him," she said. "He used to fish there. He knows how to make fire from dry bark." Rafiq hesitated only a moment, then nodded. They paddled with quiet urgency. The water was lower now, exposing things the flood had hidden. Bent street signs, upturned carts, carcasses of cows that had not made it. The smell of decay lingered, but they pressed forward. Mina pointed at a half-submerged shack. "That was where we used to dry rice," she said softly. "I remember the roof." The raft brushed past it, silent as breath. Then they saw it. The smoke. Thin, curling, almost shy. It rose from the middle of a mangled thicket, barely visible against the pale sky. "Over there," Mina whispered. They steered the raft closer. Suddenly, a rustling. Then a boy stumbled out from behind a half-burned fishing net. He wore a plastic raincoat several sizes too big. "Shuvo!" Mina cried. He froze, then ran. She jumped from the raft and met him in the water, arms wrapping around him, both crying at once. "I couldn't get back," he choked. "Everything disappeared. I waited. I didn't know if—" "We came," Mina whispered. "We came for you." Rafiq stood back, watching them, something tightening gently in his chest. He'd never had a sister, never had a moment like that to give someone. But seeing theirs was enough. Later, as they floated back toward the village, the sun broke through the clouds, not fully but in thin streaks. Light spilled across the rooftops like apology, and Rafiq, with his hands on the oar, allowed himself a small smile. Every journey, even the quiet ones, was starting to matter. Every paddle stroke was proof that they were not alone. When they returned, Mina helped her brother into the schoolhouse. People gathered again. Some hugged her, others just nodded, as if her reunion gave them all permission to hope a little more. Rafiq sat down by the door, soaked through, his muscles aching. Hassan handed him a cup of boiled water, and they drank in silence. Then Rafiq asked, "Do you think the banyan tree is still there?" Hassan looked at him, eyebrows raised. "I don't know," he said. "Want to find out?" And just like that, another route was forming. Another reason to go. Another life, maybe, still waiting. They left at sunrise the next day, earlier than usual. The morning light was pale, casting long shadows across the waterlogged village. Rafiq and Hassan packed light, just enough food for the day and 2 bottles of purified water. Their destination was the place his grandfather once called the oldest heart of the land. The banyan tree grove east of the village, where 3 hamlets met and old fishing paths crossed. They didn't expect to find people there, but something in Rafiq said they had to go. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that after days of rushing to save, he needed to seek something still standing, something that hadn't been lost. The water had changed again, not lower, but slower, as if even the flood was exhausted. Birdsong returned, tentative and thin, and for the first time in over a week, Rafiq let himself look at the sky, not with dread, but with wonder. It was streaked with blue. Actual blue. They passed landmarks long buried by the flood, the stone gate to the grain market, now visible just above the waterline, and the crooked pole where wedding flags used to hang. A dog barked from somewhere far off. They stopped, waited, listened. Nothing. Then, laughter. Children's laughter. They turned toward the sound, veering off the map's edge. And there, tucked behind a small embankment, where banana trees still held ground, was a cluster of people. A forgotten corner of the village. No one had reached them. They had made a camp above the flood, using scavenged tin sheets and a broken fishing boat flipped on its side. 8 families, 1 stove, no medicine. Rafiq's face tightened. He turned to Hassan. "We'll come back," he said firmly. They didn't stay long, only enough to mark the spot, take names, and leave behind half their food. Then they kept going. Another hour's paddle brought them to the grove, and yes, it was still there. The banyan tree, part of its roots submerged, part of its arms broken, but the trunk stood, immense, immovable. A woman sat beneath it, shelling beans, alone. She looked up as they approached. "You're the boys," she said. He nodded. "People say you find places no one finds." He stepped onto the mud bank. "Only because we're shown the way." She smiled and pointed behind her. There, in a hollow of the tree, were 3 children, eyes wide, faces pale with hunger. Rafiq crouched and pulled out the last packet of dry biscuits. They ate without speaking, He sat with them for a while, watching the leaves move above, the sun shifting between them. It was the quietest moment he'd had in days, and when they left, the woman pressed a string of marigold beads into his hand. "For your raft," she said, "so it always finds its way." Rafiq didn't reply, but he tied it to the front of the raft, and it stayed there, fluttering softly, the only bright color for miles. Back at the schoolhouse, the mood had shifted. The sky stayed clear for 2 days straight, a small miracle. Water levels dropped just enough that some villagers began sweeping mud from their homes, reclaiming their spaces inch by inch. Children started drawing again. Figures with big arms and wide rafts, stick figure heroes floating across brown waves. Rafiq recognized himself in some of them, though he never said anything. He wasn't sure what to make of being seen that way. But the marigold beads stayed on the raft, now known to everyone as the Ribbon of Hope. People had begun calling it that, the floating promise that someone was coming. On the morning of the third clear day, Rafiq received a folded note, passed to him quietly by an older man from the North Ridge. "Found this nailed to a tree near the dried patch," the man said. "Thought you should read it." The note was damp and scribbled, but legible. "Need help. 3 elders trapped inside. Roof may collapse. No way out. Please come." No name, just coordinates. Rafiq didn't hesitate. By now, villagers were helping with preparations. The raft was restocked quickly. Dried food, cloth bandages, antiseptic from the one clinic that hadn't flooded. Hassan caught up just as he was untying the rope. "Another one?" he asked. Rafiq nodded. "Of course," Hassan said, stepping onto the raft. They navigated northeast, where once there were paddy fields. Now, just a smooth stretch of bronze water. 2 hours in, they reached the place. The roof of a brick house slanted dangerously, one edge drooping into the water. Inside, muffled voices called out. Rafiq moved quickly, instructing Hassan to steady the raft while he approached the entrance. The door was wedged shut by swollen wood. He used the crowbar from their toolkit, a gift from a construction worker who had seen the boys working and insisted they take it. The wood groaned, then gave. Inside, dim light, stifling air, and 3 elders huddled on a raised platform made of chairs and planks. One woman had a swollen ankle. Another clutched a photo to her chest. Her son, perhaps. "I'm Rafiq," he said softly. "We've come to take you home." They moved carefully, gently. It took time. The woman with the swollen ankle had to be supported with rope and a blanket sling. The others cried as they stepped onto the raft. Not loudly. Just a soft, cracked weeping. The kind that says more than words. On the way back, one of the men spoke. "You came," he said. "I didn't think anyone would." Rafiq only nodded. Sometimes, words were too small. Back at the schoolhouse, the elders were received like family. Warm water, rice, rest. The woman with the ankle sprain looked at Rafiq once before falling asleep. "Your mother would be proud," she said. He blinked. "She would have come herself if she were still here," he replied quietly, then walked outside to the raft, touched the marigold beads, and sat beside them until the stars came out. Night came softer now. Not long ago, every sunset carried the weight of uncertainty. More rain, more cries for help, more darkness pressing down. But now, the village had begun to breathe again. And yet, for Rafiq, rest didn't come easily. He had started waking before dawn, not from nightmares, but from the echo of unfinished work. Even as the waters withdrew and survivors returned to rebuild, he knew the flood had not revealed all its stories. One morning, a stranger arrived. A middle-aged man with a limp, carrying nothing but a bamboo staff and a plastic bag tied at the top. He spoke little. His name was Yunus. He had walked nearly 8 kilometers from the highlands. Said he came looking for the boy with the raft. When Rafiq stepped forward, Yunus nodded. "I heard about you in the hills," he said. "There's a village cut off still, west of the old bridge. The road collapsed. The boats were all taken by the current." Rafiq had heard of that place, Chormari Para. It was small, remote, often forgotten. "How many?" Rafiq asked. Yunus looked at him, his eyes weary. "Enough," he said. "Too many for me to count alone." The next morning, they set off. Yunus joined them, slow-moving but with a sharp mind. He knew the waterways, the submerged roads, the trick of avoiding tangled fishing nets caught in the flood. The journey took longer this time. The current was strange, no longer furious, but sly. It pulled subtly, as if trying to lead them off course. At one point, a log jam forced them to drag the raft through knee-high mud. Hassan slipped once. Rafiq caught him by the shirt. They didn't laugh, but their eyes met. That was enough. By dusk, they reached Chormari Para. The village was a skeleton. Houses stood with their walls peeled open like paper, roofs slumped like broken hats. But people were there. Not many, but enough. They had gathered in what used to be a temple courtyard, now just stone steps surrounded by muck. A woman recognized Yunus and ran to him. "You made it," she said, tears in her eyes. "I told you I'd find help," he replied. Rafiq didn't speak right away. He simply stepped off the raft and began handing out the supplies they'd carried. Dried lentils, iodine tablets, dry cloths, 2 handmade crutches. There were few words, only quiet thanks. But the way they looked at him, like he was something sent by the river itself, made Rafiq feel something strange. Not pride, not power, just real. Like he had become the person he was meant to be. They stayed overnight, slept in shifts beside the old temple steps. The wind carried the sound of frogs and dripping water, and for the first time since the floods began, Rafiq dreamt not of drowning, but of dry land. Morning arrived with a faint chill, unusual for late monsoon. The mist rising from the water gave the village of Chormari Para a dreamlike stillness, as if it were holding its breath. Rafiq stood near the old temple steps, where he had spent the night wrapped in a donated shawl. The mist softened everything. The jagged roof lines, the ruined trees, even the broken expressions of those waking under makeshift tarpaulins. He watched a boy, no older than 8, scooping water from a hollowed bowl to help his grandfather wash. Every motion careful, reverent. There was so much tenderness here, even among ruin. Hassan stirred nearby, brushing the sleep from his eyes, and Yunus was already moving among the elders, checking in, his limp more pronounced after a hard night's rest. They ate what was left of the dried rice and sat for a moment, saying little. Soon, Rafiq stood. "We'll need more than this," he said quietly. He meant food, he meant rope, he meant boats, but he also meant people. People who could help carry the sick, people who could repair what was salvageable, and people who could listen. They paddled back that morning, not quickly, but with a growing sense of purpose. When they reached the schoolhouse, Rafiq didn't rest. He called for a meeting. By now, his voice carried weight, not because it was loud, but because he never used it without cause. People gathered, forming a loose circle in the courtyard. Children held onto their mothers. Old men leaned on sticks. He told them about Chormari Para, about the children, the elders, the flooded granaries. And then he asked, "Who can come?" There was a moment of hesitation, a pause, shaped not by fear, but exhaustion. Then a hand went up, then another. A woman stepped forward with a bundle of dry blankets. A farmer offered his ox cart frame for carrying supplies. Even the youngest, a boy with a bandaged foot, said, "I can carry water." Rafiq felt his throat tighten. This, he thought, is how things heal. Not all at once, not by miracles, but in shared motion. They left again that afternoon, not with a rescue this time, but a caravan. 2 rafts lashed together, 14 people, children, mothers, elders, all going back, not as victims, but as a lifeline. And on the way, Rafiq told them how he first found the raft, how it had been half sunken, covered in debris, almost lost. But it floated, he said. It waited for someone. Like Chormari Para had. The sun was behind them now, warm against their backs, and the marigold beads fluttered at the front, the quiet symbol of something bright, still holding. When they arrived again at Chormari Para, the sky was deep with late afternoon light, amber and gold threading through the drifting mist like memory returned, but it was no longer just a place of ruin. Children ran to the water's edge, calling out names. Adults came down the stone steps, this time not just to greet, but to help unload. The change was quiet, but unmistakable. This time, Rafiq didn't feel like a rescuer. He felt like a thread, pulling one fabric toward another, weaving lives back together. They brought warm blankets, a kettle, cooking oil, a bag of onions. They brought stories, too. Hassan told a group of children how they had once paddled through a mango grove, where the trees still bore fruit above the floodline. An old man recited a poem he remembered from his school days, something about rivers listening when you speak kindly. And the woman who had offered the blankets, her name was Rina, taught the children how to braid palm leaves into baskets, her fingers quick despite the swelling in her joints. Rafiq watched all this unfold and thought about how none of it had been planned. They hadn't come with grand speeches or banners, just presence and time and the willingness to stay. That night, they didn't return to the schoolhouse. They stayed in Chormari Para, sleeping on mats under a shared roof made of tarps and hope. The villagers cooked what they could, a thin stew with chili and pumpkin. Someone found salt. It tasted like home. After the meal, Yunus sat beside Rafiq and lit a small kerosene lamp. "You know," he said, "there were times I didn't believe anyone would come. Not just during the flood, before, even years back. It felt like our village was written out of the maps." Rafiq nodded slowly. "I know that feeling," he said. "We weren't seen either, until we made ourselves visible." Yunus looked at him for a long time. "You've done more than save lives," he said. "You've reminded people they matter." The wind whispered around them, rustling the temporary roof. Somewhere, a baby cried, then quieted. The sky above held a moon half full, reflected in the still waters below. And in that reflection, Rafiq saw it again. The raft, the beads, the village. Connected, enduring, changing shape, but not heart. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, and let the peace settle. The next few days blurred gently into one another, not because nothing happened, but because everything happened in small, meaningful motions. They repaired what they could. A group of boys mended torn mosquito nets with fishing line. Rina taught young girls how to dry and store food in elevated baskets. Yunus helped sketch a crude but clear map of the still submerged paths to nearby hills. And Rafiq, he floated between it all, never in command, always in motion. He patched roofs with palm leaves, guided the elderly to shaded spots, ferried pots of boiled water from one end of the village to the other. But perhaps most important of all, he listened. It was an old man named Ibrahim who told him the first story, about a time before cell phones, when floods came without warning, and people would tie lanterns to goats to find each other in the dark. Then a girl named Joya shared how she had kept her baby brother alive during the first week of floodwater by feeding him crushed biscuits and singing lullabies. And there was Kabir, who had lost his wife 2 years ago, but still wore her red scarf every Friday, tying it around his wrist like a quiet promise. Each story was a thread, and slowly, a tapestry began to emerge, not of tragedy, but of resilience. One evening, as the villagers gathered near the central courtyard, Rafiq stood with the marigold-beaded raft behind him. He hadn't planned to speak, but the moment felt like it needed something said. Not big words, not declarations, just truth. "I came because I thought I was saving lives," he said. "But now I see we're saving each other." The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was full. A woman began to sing, something soft and ancient, a melody carried from her grandmother, perhaps. Others joined, the words unfamiliar to Rafiq, but the feeling unmistakable. It was gratitude, yes, but more than that, belonging. That night, the stars above seemed clearer, and the village slept as one. Not in fear, but in warmth, and in a kind of quiet victory. The water kept receding, bit by bit, like a tide slowly letting go. Patches of earth reappeared, muddy, scarred, but solid. Each dry patch felt like a new heartbeat. By now, news of Rafiq's quiet work had reached beyond the flooded valleys. A journalist arrived one morning, barefoot and carrying only a notebook and a cheap camera wrapped in plastic. She had heard of the boy with the raft and the marigolds. Her name was Mita. She asked questions gently, scribbling between pauses. But what she seemed most drawn to was not the drama, not the rescues or the danger, but the aftermath. "How did you know what to do?" she asked Rafiq, sitting beside him as children chased each other in the mud nearby. "I didn't," he answered honestly. "I just knew I couldn't wait for someone else." Mita didn't ask more. She nodded and stayed a while, observing quietly, letting the rhythm of the place guide her story. Before she left, she took one photo, not of Rafiq alone, but of the raft, now tied to a tree stump, with the village in the background. The marigold beads fluttered as a breeze passed, soft and slow. She promised nothing, only that people should hear this. That evening, Yunus approached Rafiq again, this time holding something wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was a weathered notebook, its pages covered in hand-drawn diagrams and flood patterns. "My father's," Yunus explained. "He was a river engineer. He mapped things before anyone cared." Rafiq turned the pages slowly, careful not to tear them. "There's still work to do," Yunus said. "If we can teach people to read the land, maybe next time we won't lose so much." Rafiq looked at the lines, the careful sketches, the notations in red ink that marked danger zones and water patterns. He felt the call of something deeper, not just to react, but to prepare, to teach, to prevent. That night, under the wide open sky, he lay awake thinking. He remembered the early days, the chaos, the the fear, the single choice to step into the water, and he saw how far that single step had reached, not just into flooded homes, but into hearts, maps, futures. The flood had come to break, but something else had risen to bind. The schoolhouse was dry again. Its walls were still streaked with mud, the chalkboard warped, and the books waterlogged beyond repair. But the smell of damp rot was giving way to open air, to sun-warmed dust, to life returning. Rafiq stood in the doorway, looking at the benches that had once held quiet lessons, and then, during the storm, frightened families huddled together in the dark. It was strange how one space could hold so many versions of itself. He was not alone. Hassan leaned against the window frame, his arm now fully healed but still wrapped in cloth out of habit. "Feels smaller now, doesn't it?" he said. Rafiq nodded. "Or maybe we've just grown." A soft laugh and silence after, the kind of silence that said more than words. Outside, new sounds had returned to the village. Hammers tapping wood, women pounding rice, children playing barefoot in the softened earth. There was movement again, rhythm, and above it all, a single banner, hand-painted in blue and red, stretched between two poles near the river's bend. It read, "Chormari Para, rebuilt together." The idea hadn't been Rafiq's. It had come from Joya, the young mother who once fed her brother crushed biscuits and now taught health lessons to other girls. She had asked the traveling artist to leave behind a memory, something more permanent than footprints. Rafiq walked the village slowly that day, greeting each person not with words of heroism, but simple acknowledgments, the way one neighbor speaks to another. Because that's what they were now. No one waited to be saved anymore. They worked, side by side. Flood markers had been carved into trees to show future generations where the water once rose. Grain storage was being built on stilts and ropes tied across courtyards. Evacuation guides for the next season, should it ever come. And the raft? It was retired, tied near the riverbank, half in water, half in memory. Not buried, not burned, but kept. A symbol of what had been, and of what one decision could become. That night, under a sky brushed with stars, Rafiq sat beside his mother. She had returned days earlier, walking through fields of debris to find him at the village edge. There were no grand reunions, no declarations, just her arms around his shoulders, her forehead pressed to his. Now, as they shared a bowl of lentils and rice, she said softly, "You did what I hoped you would do, even before I knew it." Rafiq looked out toward the river, the marigold beads still catching the moonlight. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The story wasn't over, but it was no longer just his. It belonged to Chormari Para, to Eunice, to Joya, to Rina, to Hassan, to every hand that reached across the water. It belonged to the ones who stayed, the ones who rebuilt, and the ones who remembered. And tomorrow, someone else might step into the water. But tonight, there was peace. Not perfect, not permanent, but real. And for now, that was enough. Thank you for listening. Tonight, we close the chapter on a young man's courage. Not the kind shaped by fame or spectacle, but by steady hands, quiet choices, and a heart turned outward. Rafiq's story began with floodwaters rising and a single raft bound together by hope and marigold beads. But it unfolded into something far larger. A village rediscovering itself, a boy becoming a bridge, and neighbors no longer waiting for rescue, but becoming each other's rescue. It is easy to forget that most heroism never makes headlines, that many lifelines are built from rice sacks, not steel, guided by instinct, not orders. But stories like this remind us, when things fall apart, the pieces don't have to be swept away. They can be picked up, hand to hand, voice to voice, raft to raft. As you drift off tonight, may you carry a bit of this village with you, its laughter, its resilience, its quiet light against the flood. And may you remember, you don't have to wait for the world to call you a hero. Sometimes it starts with simply asking, who needs help, and listening for the answer. Good night from all of us here at One Hero a Day. Sleep well. The world is more beautiful than we think.